Something happened to you not long ago, and you haven't said it out loud yet. Not because you're hiding it, but because it didn't come with a clear explanation. Didn't arrive as a single moment you could point to. It arrived as a quiet shift, like gravity changing direction, while everything still looked the same. And even though you haven't fully processed it, everyone else seems to feel it. People are responding to you differently, studying you like something familiar that no longer behaves the way they expect. Messages from old friends appear without context. People you barely know linger in conversations longer than necessary. There's a hesitation now, a pause, like they're waiting to see which version of you will show up. And sometimes you catch yourself wondering if you're reading too much into it. You're not. They feel it too. They just don't know what to call it. You didn't suddenly become louder or more confident in an obvious way. You didn't change how you dress or how you speak. If anything, you've become quieter, more contained, more still. But that's exactly why it's noticeable. In a world where everyone is constantly signaling, performing, explaining, and proving, stillness stands out. And right now, these civilized people, you're carrying a kind of stillness that makes people uncomfortable because it doesn't ask for permission and it doesn't seek validation. What changed wasn't your personality. It was your relationship with yourself. Something inside you crossed a line it can't uncross. Maybe it happened during a period when you were exhausted, when you were giving everything and getting nothing back. Maybe it happened when something you believed in fell apart, and you realized no amount of effort could save it. Maybe it was loss or disappointment, these civilized people, or a slow accumulation of moments where you kept choosing survival over honesty until honesty finally demanded its turn. However it happened, the result is the same. A part of you stopped cooperating with a system that never truly served you. For most of your life, you were playing a game without realizing it. Everyone is. A constant, silent competition built into modern existence. Who is more successful? Who is more liked? Who is ahead? Who is falling behind? It shows up in careers, relationships, friendships, even in casual conversations. People measure themselves constantly, often unconsciously, against the reactions they receive from the world. And the pressure to perform inside that system slowly shapes who you become. You adjust. You edit. You soften edges. You amplify certain traits and hide others. Not because you're fake, but because you want to belong. But something reached a breaking point. The cost of performing became higher than the cost of being real. And when that happens, the performance collapses, not dramatically, quietly. People. The version of you that needed approval didn't survive. The version that explained itself too much didn't survive. The version that stayed silent to keep the peace didn't survive. Those versions were built for a specific environment. People, one where acceptance was conditional and love was transactional. When that environment became unbearable, these civilized people, those parts had no choice but to fall away. What replaced them wasn't confidence in the traditional sense. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't detachment. It was something simpler and more solid. A self that no longer negotiates its existence. A self that doesn't need to be witnessed to be real people. A self that doesn't rise or fall with other people's reactions. And people feel that immediately. Humans are incredibly sensitive to shifts in presence. Long before language, survival depended on reading subtle cues. Who is safe? Who is grounded? Who is unstable? That wiring is still there. So when someone stops broadcasting neediness, stops scanning for approval, stops adjusting themselves in real time, it sends a signal, a confusing one. These civilized people. Because most people don't know how to interact with someone who isn't trying to get something from them. That's why people are acting strange around you. They're trying to locate you inside a hierarchy that no longer applies. Human brains are constantly ranking. It's automatic. Where do I stand relative to this person? Are they above me? Below me? A threat? An ally? Someone to impress? Someone to dominate? Someone to ignore? But when you don't give the usual cues, these civilized people, the system glitches. You're not signaling submission or dominance. You're not competing. You're not seeking attention. You're not withholding it either. You're just present. That makes you unplaceable. People don't know whether to lean in or step back. They don't know whether you're confident or disconnected, powerful or indifferent, intimidating or simply uninterested. And the truth is, you're not trying to be any of those things. You're just not participating in the performance anymore. And in a culture built on performance, authenticity feels like rebellion. You might notice that conversations feel different now. People ask you questions and they wouldn't have asked before. They listen more closely to your answers. There's a subtle intensity in their attention, like they're trying to extract something. They sense that you've figured something out, even if they don't know what it is. And they want to understand it without going through what you went through. Because here's the thing they feel but can't articulate. You stopped playing a game they're still trapped in. There's a constant background noise in most people's lives. Anxiety about status, fear of falling behind, pressure to be seen as valuable. It drives behavior more than anyone wants to admit. And when someone steps out of that noise, when someone stops orienting their identity around comparison, it creates a vacuum. Your calm highlights their restlessness. Your groundedness exposes their instability. Not because you're better, but because you're no longer feeding the same system. That's why reactions to you are splitting. People who are comfortable with themselves feel drawn to you. Well, they sense familiarity. There's no competition, no tension, no need to perform. Being around you feels like permission to exhale. These interactions feel easy, honest, and grounded. But people who are deeply invested in the performance react differently. Some avoid you. Others watch you closely. Both responses come from discomfort. You act as a mirror. And mirrors are threatening when someone doesn't like what they might see. Your presence forces comparison they can't win, not because you're superior, but because you're not competing at all. So some people pull away. Others try to provoke you. They test you, criticize you, label you, try to pull you back into old patterns. If they can get a reaction, These civilized people, they can convince themselves you're still part of the same game. Pay attention to who is fading from your life right now. These people were connected to a version of you that needed them. A version that overgave. A version that sought approval. That version is gone. And without it, the relationship doesn't function the same way. Letting go doesn't mean rejecting them. People, it means acknowledging that certain dynamics only exist under certain conditions, and those conditions no longer exist. At the same time, new people are showing up. Unexpected people. People who don't need you be smaller, louder, softer, or more impressive. They're responding to who you actually are, not what you provide. These connections feel heavier, more real, less frantic. They're not built on performance. They're built on recognition. Not everyone will interpret your change accurately. Some will call it arrogance. Others will say you've become distant or cold. Let them. These civilized people, people who benefited from your lack of boundaries, will always frame your boundaries as a flaw. People who relied on your availability will resent your selectiveness. This isn't a reflection of your character. It's a reflection of what they lost access to. You didn't become heartless. You became intentional. You didn't withdraw from connection. You withdrew from chaos. You didn't lose empathy. You stopped sacrificing yourself to prove it. People, there's an important pattern here. These civilized people, the people most disturbed by your growth, are the people who profited from your previous version. These civilized people, the ones who could overstep without consequence, the ones who could take without giving. Your transformation disrupts their comfort. Not because you're harming them, but because you're no longer manageable. And now you're standing at a critical point. Because what you've developed is powerful, but it's not complete. You've built internal authority. A sense of self that doesn't depend on constant feedback. Most people never get here. But this is where many stop, and stopping here creates a new trap. Presence without direction becomes ego. Depth without purpose becomes stagnation. The question now isn't who you are anymore. It's what you're going to do with who you've become. And that's where the next phase begins. Part 2. Because internal authority is only the foundation. It's the ground beneath your feet, not the structure itself. And if you don't build something intentional on top of it, the same awareness that freed you can turn into drift. Many people reach the stage and mistake detachment for completion. They confuse peace with purpose. But peace without direction eventually feels empty. And emptiness has a way of pulling people back into old patterns just to feel something familiar. This is the part of transformation most people aren't prepared for. The attention you're receiving now, the curiosity, the magnetism, it's temporary if it isn't anchored to something real. Presence alone doesn't sustain a life. It attracts, but it doesn't build. These civilized people, that's why the next phase requires honesty at a level deeper than anything you've done so far. Not honesty about who you are. You've already faced that. Honesty about what you actually want. Not what sounds impressive. Not what earns respect in rooms you don't even enjoy being in. Not what fits someone else's definition of success. What do you genuinely care about enough to engage with when motivation fades. What problems feel meaningful to you? Not because they elevate your image, but because they align with your values. These questions don't have fast answers. They require sitting with discomfort because they strip away borrowed ambition and inherited expectations. Purpose isn't found, it's clarified. And clarity comes from subtraction, not addition. You'll notice as you begin to orient your life around what actually matters to you. The pull of external validation weakens even further. That's when a new kind of fear can appear. People, not the fear of being judged, but the fear of being responsible for your own direction. When you stop following scripts written by others, there's no one left to blame if you drift. Freedom comes with accountability, and accountability requires structure. This is where skill becomes essential. Attention without competence collapses. Respect without contribution fades. If people are drawn to you now, it's because of who you are. But what keeps that connection alive is what you can do, what you can build, what you can offer that has real value. This isn't about chasing status or achievement for ego. It's about alignment. When your inner growth is matched by outer capability, influence becomes natural. You don't have to demand it. It emerges. Choose something worth getting good at. Something that challenges you. Something that serves others in a real way. Not to prove your worth, but to express it. Skill grounds presence. It gives your internal authority a practical outlet. Without it, awareness turns inward and begins to stagnate. Your environment matters more now than it ever has. People, you've changed, but your surroundings might still be optimized for an older version of you. An environment shapes behavior quietly, relentlessly. Look at your routines, your physical space, your digital inputs, the conversations you allow yourself to be part of. Are they reinforcing who you are now, or pulling you back toward who you used to be? Transformation isn't maintained by willpower. Willpower burns out. It's maintained by systems. Small, boring, repeatable structures that support your nervous system and your focus when life gets heavy again. Morning practices that ground you. Evening rituals that help you process. Regular check-ins that keep you aligned. These aren't habits for productivity. People, they're infrastructure for stability. Because here's the truth most people don't want to hear. Changing isn't the hard part. Staying changed is. Anyone can have a breakthrough moment. Anyone can feel awakened for a season. But life doesn't stop testing you once you gain awareness. Both stress returns, fatigue returns, old triggers resurface. And when you're tired, the mind looks for shortcuts. It reaches for familiar patterns, even if they were destructive. Because familiarity feels safe, this is where most people lose what they gained. Not in dramatic collapse, but in small compromises that accumulate until they wake up one day, wondering how they ended up back where they started. You can't afford that. Not after what it cost you to get here. Staying here requires vigilance, people, but not the anxious kind. The conscious kind. Awareness of your internal state. Noticing when resentment creeps in. When you start performing again without realizing it. When you say yes out of obligation instead of alignment. Catching those moments early is the difference between course correction and relapse. The attention you receive will fluctuate. Some days people will be drawn to you. Other days you'll feel invisible. Neither means anything anymore. The real measure of your progress is who you are in private. When no one is watching. When there's no feedback. When there's nothing to prove. The integrity of that private self is what sustains everything else. If that version of you is solid, the rest follows naturally. The real goal was never to become impressive. It was to become aligned. To build a life you don't need to escape from. Where your work matters to you. Where your relationships are honest. Where your daily actions reflect your values instead of someone else's expectations. This kind of life often looks quieter from the outside. Less flashy, less performative, but it feels stable. And stability is something most people never experience. This requires saying no to opportunities that look good but drain you. It requires disappointing people who were invested in your availability. These civilized people, it requires trusting your internal compass even when it leads you away from paths others celebrate. People, that's not arrogance. That's maturity. Understand this clearly. You didn't ascend to a higher rank. You didn't unlock a secret level. You rejected a flawed measurement system altogether. You stopped measuring your worth by metrics that were never designed to capture what makes you valuable. You stepped off a ladder everyone else is still climbing and started building something solid on the ground. People still fighting for position look over and feel confused. Civilized people. They can't figure out where you belong because belonging in the way they understand it no longer applies. And that confusion creates fascination. Not because you're superior, but because you're free from the frame they're trapped inside. The moment you start seeing yourself as above others, you step back into the same system you escaped. The freedom isn't in being higher, it's in refusing the hierarchy entirely. In living according to principles instead of positions. In valuing substance over status. What makes you compelling now isn't dominance. It isn't detachment. It's authenticity. People, in a world saturated with curated identities and constant self-promotion, you became someone comfortable being seen as you actually are. Imperfect. Grounded, human. That's rare. People. And rarity draws attention without effort. Some people will never understand your shift. That's okay. Understanding was never the goal. Alignment was. And alignment changes the way you move through the world, whether anyone applauds it or not. Some people climb ladders their entire lives and still feel insecure. Others build foundations and feel steady even in uncertainty. You chose the harder path, the quieter one. These civilized people, the one that doesn't guarantee applause, but does offer peace. And when you choose substance over performance, when you choose reality over image, the world responds differently. Not because you demand attention, but because real always stands out where almost everything else is an act. Because internal authority is only the foundation. It's the ground beneath your feet, not the structure itself. And this is where many people misunderstand what they've reached. They feel the relief of no longer needing approval and assume they've arrived. they've arrived somewhere permanent. They mistake stillness for completion. But stillness without intention eventually turns into drift. And drift has a way of quietly undoing everything you worked for. Freedom without direction doesn't stay peaceful for long. It becomes weightless. And weightlessness, over time, feels like emptiness. This is the phase where the world stops pushing you and waits to see if you'll move on your own. Up until now, pain forced growth. Pressure stripped illusions away. Circumstances demanded honesty. But from here forward, nothing external will demand anything from you. And that's dangerous in a different way. Because when there's no immediate threat, no chaos, no crisis, old patterns start whispering instead of shouting. They suggest comfort, familiarity, ease. Not because they're good for you, but because they're known. This is where discipline replaces survival. And discipline isn't about force. It's about direction. You have to decide what you're building now, because awareness alone doesn't construct a life. It only clears the land. If you don't choose a direction intentionally, you'll default to whatever path requires the least resistance, people, and that path almost always leads back to versions of yourself you already outgrew. Here's what most people never realize. The moment you stop chasing validation, the world tests whether you'll replace it with meaning or with ego. Presence without purpose often turns into quiet superiority. Detachment without responsibility becomes avoidance. And that's how people slip into isolation while calling it peace. You didn't come this far to disappear. You came this far to live deliberately. So the question becomes uncomfortable very quickly. What do you actually want to devote yourself to? Not what sounds noble. Not what earns admiration. What holds your attention when no one is watching? What problems do you think about even when they don't benefit you socially? What work feels heavy, but honest instead of draining and hollow? Purpose doesn't arrive as clarity. It arrives as resonance. Something pulls at you repeatedly, quietly, without drama. And most people ignore that pull because it doesn't align with how success is supposed to look. But if you're honest, you already know where your attention naturally returns when there's no performance involved. That's not an accident. That's direction asking to be acknowledged. Once direction becomes clear, the next requirement is skill. And this is where many people resist, because skill requires humility. It requires being bad at something again. It requires sustained effort without immediate recognition. But presence alone doesn't help anyone. Awareness without ability becomes self-indulgent. The world doesn't need more people who understand themselves. It needs people who can translate that understanding into something useful. Competence grounds you. It gives your inner authority a way to move in the world. It keeps you from floating above reality while calling it enlightenment. When your internal growth is matched by external capability, influence becomes inevitable. Not loud influence, quiet influence. The kind that doesn't announce itself but changes outcomes. Choose something worth mastering, something that stretches you, something that forces you to stay a beginner long enough to remain humble. This isn't about proving yourself. It's about alignment. When what you do matches who you are, effort feels clean instead of draining. You stop working against yourself. Your environment now plays a critical role. You can't live with the same inputs and expect a different internal state. What you consume shapes how you think. What you tolerate shapes how you feel. What you allow repeatedly shapes who you become. Look closely at your daily surroundings. The conversations you entertain, the content you scroll through, the spaces you spend time in. Are they feeding clarity or noise, grounding or distraction? Most people underestimate how much their environment decides for them. They believe they're choosing freely, while their habits quietly choose on their behalf. When your space supports who you are becoming, discipline feels natural. If it supports who you used to be, discipline feels like constant resistance. Adjusting your environment isn't dramatic. It's subtle, removing friction from good choices, adding friction to bad ones. This is how transformation becomes sustainable. Because the truth is, staying changed is far harder than changing. Change often happens in moments of intensity. Staying changed happens in moments of boredom, fatigue, and emotional neutrality. When there's no crisis to wake you up. When life becomes ordinary again. That's when the mind tries to slip back into old comforts, old narratives, old identities that once felt safe. You'll notice it when you're tired, when you start explaining yourself again unnecessarily, when you feel the urge to prove something that no longer matters, when you say yes out of habit instead of alignment. These aren't failures. They're signals, people. Course corrections are easier when you catch them early. Waiting until you're fully disconnected makes the return painful. You don't need to be rigid. You need to be aware. The attention you're receiving right now will not stay consistent. Some days people will gravitate toward you. Other days you'll feel invisible. Neither state is permanent. Neither defines you. If your sense of self rises and falls with attention, you've only replaced one dependency with another. The real test is whether you remain grounded when there's silence. Whether the version of you that exists without witnesses is solid. Private integrity is what sustains public presence. If who you are alone matches who you are seen as, there's no internal conflict draining you. No fracture between image and reality. That alignment creates a calm most people never experience because they're always managing perception. The goal was never admiration. Admiration is unstable. It turns quickly. The goal was alignment. To wake up without needing to escape your own life. To move through your days without feeling like you're betraying yourself in small ways. To let your work reflect your values instead of compensating for insecurities. This requires disappointing people. There's no way around that. Civilized people, people who were accustomed to your availability, will feel abandoned. People who benefited from your flexibility will feel restricted. People who relied on your silence will feel challenged by your clarity. This doesn't mean you've become cruel. It means you've become honest people, and honesty always disrupts systems built on quiet compromise. Say no when something drains you, even if it flatters your image. Say yes when something aligns, even if it doesn't impress anyone. Trusting your internal compass will isolate you at times. That isolation isn't punishment. It's space. Space for new structures to form. Space for connections based on reality instead of convenience. Understand this clearly. You didn't ascend to a higher position. You didn't become superior. You stepped out of a broken measurement system. You stopped measuring your worth by comparison, people, productivity, or external milestones. You stopped climbing a ladder that never led anywhere stable. And instead, you started building something on the ground, something solid, something yours. People still on the ladder look over and feel confused. They can't figure out where you stand because standing no longer applies. They assume you must think you're above them because that's the only language the ladder teaches. But you're not above or below. You're elsewhere. And that difference unsettles them. The moment you begin to see yourself as higher, you step back into the same game you escaped. Freedom isn't about rank. It's about refusing the premise altogether. It's about living by principles instead of positions, substance instead of status, reality instead of image. What makes you compelling now isn't power. It isn't detachment. It's authenticity. You stopped editing yourself to be digestible. You allowed yourself to be real, even when that meant being misunderstood. In a world built on curation and performance, that's rare, and rarity draws attention without effort. Some people will never understand your shift. They don't need to. Understanding was never the requirement. Alignment was, and alignment changes how you move, speak, choose, and respond whether anyone approves or not. Some people will keep climbing, chasing the next rung, hoping security waits higher up. Others will quietly build foundations and sleep at night. You chose the path that doesn't promise applause, but does offer stability, people. The path that trades constant validation for internal peace. And when you choose substance over performance, when you choose reality over image, the world responds differently. Not because you demand attention, not because you seek recognition, but because in a sea of performance, real is impossible to ignore.